Hi, good morning. I guess most of you, as aspiring entrepreneurs, will already have heard from so many people that 90% of startups or more uh, fail after the first year. But I'll bet most of you will not be aware that 65% of all startups will fail because of co-founder conflict. So my name is Ifty Nasir. I'm the founder and CEO of Vested. And I'm here to share with you a little experience and knowledge that we've had from helping to support thousands of startups and SMEs through their equity journey. And it's really about that equity journey and getting that equity journey sorted at the early stages in the right way that's going to make a big difference to you guys. So going back to the story of the co-founders, the last thing that you need is a falling out. When you set up a business together, you need to have the strength and the ability to ask those tough questions early on, make sure you have an understanding of who's doing what, and that you guys are really truly aligned in the business that you're setting up. And when you do set it up, often this is how it shapes up. Three friends working together, everybody's going to do the same amount of work. Everybody should have the same stake in the enterprise, and therefore the reward should be the same for all. And I guess reality doesn't always work out like this. As you know, shit happens. Relationships break, problems arise in the background because different people have different agendas to work. And that's not unusual, okay? And that's why, as I say, you need to be prepared for what the future brings. When people walk away, when people bring different contributions to business, if they walk away without having given, does it feel fair that they walk away with a big chunk of the business? And I guess the fact is that this is all too often the case. And when it goes wrong, it means that there's a lot of expenditure with lawyers, and then also you end up tied up, and it's way too frequent. Okay, but the main fact of this is that although this is too frequently happens, you don't have to do it this way. That way of setting up is easy, it's straightforward, but you can adjust that going forward. Okay, and the other challenge, going back to that split, is that that 73% of teams will do that equity split that we just talked about within the first month of founding the business. And I guess you'll already appreciate that in that first month, first few months, do you know what everybody's going to actually do versus what they promise or suggest they're going to do? Having that sort of split that we talked about earlier between 2 or 3 founders, or everybody equal, feels fair, doesn't it? I mean, we're going into this together. We're fully committed. It should be equal. But as I say, founders have been doing this way of doing it wrong because actually you need flexibility. You'll have heard about the experiences of Facebook. I'm sure you've all watched the social enterprise, and many of you will have heard about the Zipcar idea about 2 moms kicking off this idea, and actually it causing a huge amount of heartache when they broke up, as it were. And so that thing about founders getting this wrong for such a long time is something that we feel that we can help you sort out and get right going forwards. So we'll start off with the normal way of doing things, and just break a few of the I guess the terminology issues that prevent people getting it right because they don't know what they're talking about early doors. So let's just talk about the different types of shares and options that you will have heard of in your journey so far, but may not be fully aware of. So I'll split this into two sections: those who bring cash, and those who bring their endeavor, and the rewards available to each of them. So a team member can come in many different forms, as I mentioned earlier. There can be those people who are the founders of the business, those who bring cash to the business, and those who literally just bring their endeavor or contribution of some other kind. So the founders, etc., we've talked about how their shares might be split early up, but then think about investors. Investors will have two formats of shares. Ordinary shares, similar to those of the founders. Ordinary share, as it has value, as it grows, it's a stake, a percentage, a proportion of the business. And you can start off the business with 100 shares, 1,000 shares, 1,000,000 shares. It's literally about how small the units that you make of the business, but it's all just in total 100%. As you go to more sophisticated investors, let's say sophisticated angels, VCs, PEs, private equity, venture capital, they will generally want preference shares. Those preference shares give them special rights in relation to voting. Maybe there's certain matters that they will want to preserve advantage against everybody else on, even against the founders. The other preference will often be around capital distribution. If there's a liquidation of the business, they will want first call. If there is a sale of the business, they may want a multiple of their investment before the rest of the shares are distributed. Obviously, if you want more information on any of this, you can drop in at vested.com and you'll be able to find out more on there. But you can also set up a consultation with one of our equity consultants. Let's move on to the non-cash investment. So people bringing their endeavor or other contributions. So just as a reminder, let's say your shares today are worth £1. Okay, if you were to give somebody, like a team member, an employee, a share of £1, on receipt of that share, they are receiving essentially a value of £1, and therefore they are taxed at their marginal tax rate on that £1. So if you're a high rate taxpayer or a super rate taxpayer, you'll be paying 40 to 45 pence in tax before you've even gone through anything. And who knows, as we all know, shares can go down as well as up. So most people would not want that type of structure where they're given shares, they have to pay tax up front, and then who knows where that goes. So the most common way of sharing equity with people who are not bringing capital, cash into the system, is options. Now, there are many types of options, but very simply put, an option is the right to buy a share at a pre-agreed price at some point in the future. Now, at some point in the future may include some conditions or some specific delivery around that, or it may well just be tenure time. But all options are not the same. There are those with tax advantages like EMIs. EMI stands for Enterprise Management Incentive, and that's a HMRC tax wrap scheme whereby the person that you give an EMI to will be able to get any growth in that share value at just 10% tax. So let's say if the shares start today at £1 and you get £10 a share, that £9, the person who receives the EMI will only have to pay 90 pence tax. That's brilliant. They'll walk away with £8.10 net. The other massive advantage of EMI is that the HMRC will allow you to offset the whole of that £9 growth against your corporation tax. Okay, so it's a win-win for both the recipient and the company, because it's a behavior that the the government recognise is valuable, because it's that whole notion of the ownership effect, the ability where when people have a stake in an enterprise, their relationship with it changes. The other type of option, known as an unapproved option, because it doesn't have any approval from HMRC in its structure, but also often known as an ordinary option. In the same scenario where you have a £1 share going to £10, the outcome is very, very different. The recipient will have to pay their marginal tax rate at the point of exercising that option. So let's say it goes from that £1 to £10, that £9 will be subject to income tax at marginal rates of 40 to 45% for this person. And there is no offset against corporation tax for the company. So although they're often referred to as options, they are two very different beasts, but often deployed EMI for employees because it's only available for employees, and unapproved options for many other folk, whether it's advisors, suppliers, etc. There's all sorts of use cases for unapproved options. But as you can imagine, those two different schemes have a very different economic output for the recipient and indeed the company. So one at 10% and one, let's say, 40%. Another alternative route to use is what's known as a growth share. Now, a growth share allows you, the beneficiary, to have any growth at 20% at the moment, essentially capital gains tax. Okay. Now, the way that a growth share works is that the current share price, as we said earlier, let's just stick with that at £1, is the value of the share at that point. There is then a hope premium put on top of that, and let's say that's 20%. So let's say the total here that we've created is £1.20. That's known as a hurdle. So growth share has a hurdle. So when it's issued, anything below that hurdle, the person who gets that share has no rights to. So basically, when it's issued with zero value, both from a tax perspective and from the recipient's perspective. So if the share sold tomorrow at £1.15, shares sold at £1.15, the holder of the growth share would not have any value accruing to her. However, if the value of the share increases, and let's say it goes up to that £10 again, then here, rather than the £9 growth we talked about earlier, here you've now got £8.80 growth, and the recipient will be able to have the whole of that £8.20 growth, £8.80 growth at a 20% tax rate, because none of that was guaranteed when they received the shares. The growth was subject to their contribution, and therefore the existing shareholders were not diluted of their value that they'd created by the time the person joined them and received the growth shares, but any of the value above the hurdle that the growth shares attained, the person can get at capital gains tax. Again, I know there's a lot of information there, but you can read and hear a lot more about it by either going to vested.com or indeed sorting out a consultation with one of our equity consultants. Okay, so that's the main use cases of equity as you'll use it in your business as you start. Obviously, ordinary shares when you kick off, pref shares when you start getting big investment coming through, and growth shares and options for those people who help you on that route, but not necessarily bringing capital. Now, when you set up shares within the team or with people who you're going to have a promise of delivery against, you need to create some protection for yourself. Okay, issuing shares, lots of people will do this. They will issue shares to people on the promise that they will bring, I don't know, X amount of sales or Y investment to the investors to the table. Often they don't deliver, but the shares have already been issued, and pulling those shares back is really tough. If those shares have attained value during that period while they're being issued to the person, then as well as the legal complexity, what you have then is also a tax complexity, So you want to avoid that as far as possible. So the structure that we've put in place and made easy for anybody who joins the platform is the structure of conditionality on shares. So let's talk through a notion of Stephanie, the founder, asks Simon to help her with building the business over the next 2 years, let's say. Okay. The reward that Simon will get for that help over the next 2 years is 100,000 shares. Now, so long as Stephanie is very clear in terms of what needs to be delivered by Simon, so very tangible, measurable outcomes, then it's very straightforward for Stephanie and Simon to go into this relationship. So what Stephanie will do is she will issue the shares when they shake hands on the deal. Okay, so Simon's going to help build the business from £1 to £10, and whatever else that is made tangible and specific. And at the point of after the delivery horizon, at the point of delivery, Stephanie will be able to assess, did Simon do what he said he was going to do? Now, if the answer is yes, Stephanie can just press a few buttons and allow the shares that she promised to Simon back here to be released. Because what we've done here is we've issued the shares, but during the period of delivery, the shares are held in essentially a safe. It's both a legal and digital safe, or an escrow type structure, and it's only at the point of evaluation of the delivery that Stephanie needs to decide whether to open that safe and allow Simon to walk away with his reward, or indeed Simon didn't do everything that was promised, so Stephanie might reduce his reward, or indeed he did none of what he promised, so she can remove that reward altogether. So the mechanism we deploy on the platform is essentially what's known as a conditional share, or a conditional growth share. And in each case, when they receive the shares, they have no value. Over time, they may attain value, and then there is an assessment as to whether the person has done what they said they were going to do. Now, obviously, under this sort of structure, Simon will never walk away with any of Stephanie's shares that he didn't earn. But if he does earn them fair and square, the proportion that he earns fair and square, he will get at the best tax point, as if he received them at this point with zero value, and the value that has been attained is subject only to capital gains tax at 20%. So this structure of conditionality is a really powerful tool for you to understand and be happy to utilize. And as I said, it's very straightforward. If you're clear in terms of what the delivery is, it's measurable, tangible, this sort of approach is very helpful for you in the partnerships that you're about to start. We've put this, along with the notion of growth shares and indeed options, into a structure called an agile partnership. And what I'll do now is just walk you through how an agile partnership can work. As I mentioned earlier, when you start up your business, you will agree an amount of equity between the partners. And what you need to do is make sure that equity is only available to them if they stick around and they deliver the milestones that you've agreed, the tangible, measurable deliverables I mentioned earlier. If they don't, people shouldn't be able to walk away with your shares. And you certainly don't want to spend the time and effort and the headache of getting lawyers involved. It really does result in a lot of pain, a lot of wasted time, and a lot of wasted money. So how do we build this? So we talked earlier about a situation where three friends set up the business all together, and they have the 10,000 shares each. What we then propose, at whatever stage this comes to pass, that a set of conditional shares are issued as well. Okay. Now the conditional shares are on the basis of, let's say, Arthur delivering X, Susan delivering Y, and Jazz delivering Z. Okay, so the 10,000 shares that each of them have at the start is always theirs. The conditional shares are based on the delivery of what's being promised. So when it comes to the delivery horizon that we talked about earlier, let's say Arthur has delivered 95% of X. Brilliant. He gets to hold on to 28,500 of those conditional shares. Susan, 80% of Y, she holds on to 24,000. But look at Jazz. Jazz only delivered 25% of Z. Only holds on to 7,500 of those conditional shares. So now the total number of shares in the business has been reduced, because for those shares that weren't truly earned, we deferred them and then cancelled. Very straightforward to do on the platform, very complicated to do any other way. But this allows this partnership to flex. And then as a consequence, you can see that the adjusted proportion of the business reflects what each person actually did rather than what they promised to do. I mean, clearly, if Jazz still had a third of the business and had only delivered a fraction of what Jazz was supposed to deliver, it would feel very unfair to both Arthur and Susan. Now, Jazz falling down in his stake relative to them may feel unfair to him, but as I said earlier, if this delivery resulted in still holding on to 33%, at best, it would be friction between the founders. At worst, or in the worst case scenario, what it means is that the business would probably fold, because people will not carry on for a long time in an environment where it's just not equitable in terms of the reward. Somebody's being carried, people will stop. That business may well just fail, and then maybe Susan and Arthur will set up another one altogether. At least this way, Jazz gets some of the contribution for what he brought early on in helping to set it up. But this is a far fairer way of working stuff, and we can make this happen for you easy as pie. As I said, we've already helped many people go through issues of this nature, and indeed we're making it even easier for folks. For you guys, this week we are launching what we've called Launch Unvested. That allows you, if you haven't already created your business, it will allow you to set up your business. It will allow you to incorporate through the platform. It will allow you to distribute those initial shareholdings to the founding members. It will allow you to set up your directors, etc., and then distribute conditional shares to each of those who are going to help you on your journey. It will allow you to issue conditional shares ongoing for as long as you stay with Vested, because what we're offering you guys today is essentially a 50% discount for life on launch on Vested. The code that you want on that, if you just go on to Vested and register for either a new business, or if you've already incorporated, you can still set up an agile partnership through the platform and you'll get the discount. So membership is normally £100 a month, but with the 50% discount, that'll be £50 for you guys to set up your business, manage all your equity, and manage the relationship between the delivery and the shareholding of those who join you on your journey now. As I said, there's lots of help on the Vested platform to help you think through this stuff, but we also have a whole team of equity consultants who can help you through with this thinking as well. So all I can say to you now is, look forward to you setting up the ideas and the concepts that you've got into real life businesses and unleash that power of equity that we've talked about here, about helping people bring what they promise to the table, making sure it's equitable and fair for everybody who's on the journey with you, and that everything is flexible based on what reality and circumstances bring to the table for you, because journeys will change. So with that, as I said, I've shared a lot of information. I hope it's been useful and helpful, but I'd like to open up to any questions.
So we have quite a few questions. And the first one comes from Nayan. How do we address the challenges of evaluating performance, especially qualitative ones? How do we quantify them in percentages?
Okay. So the first thing, and the thing that most founders setting up businesses forget about, is actually having that conversation about what you're going to do. Now, in the first 6 months, first year, it might be a little bit ambiguous. So maybe you'll set the first chunk of conditional equity for the next 6 months. So over the next 6 months, I don't know, Chris is going to do the marketing. He's going to put together the marketing plan, etc. John's going to go out and get the first investment, or get us our first office, or whatever. These things can be broken down. The whole idea of conditional equity is break it down to what you can see on the horizon. The first 6 months, you should be able to see what tangible deliveries each of you is going to bring to the table. At the end of that 6 months, you can issue a new chunk of equity. There may well be a need for a new hurdle to be created if value has already been ascribed to the business, but there may not be. But in either case, you can set the conditionality around what you actually can see today. And then you can reset some more in due course. Because equity is not a finite thing. Equity is something that you can actually really start using in many wonderful ways once you realize that it's actually expanding. All you're doing when you're sharing or creating new equity is growing the pie. It's not a zero-sum game.
Cool. And the next great question comes from Lucy. If X is a set of qualitative requirements, how can you determine quantitatively what fraction of the requirements were delivered, especially if some have more weight than others?
So firstly, just because I use the same numbers doesn't mean that you have to. Okay, so that's the first thing. Not everybody will get the same proportion. And even as you start off, one of you, Lucy, will be the founder. There may be a set of co-founders, and maybe other people who help. So everybody's going to bring different things to the table. But at some stage, you need to be able to assess. There'll be lots of intangible contributions, and there'll be lots of things that are more subjective in assessment. But if you don't have the tough conversation now in terms of what is it actually that you're going to deliver, then sooner or later, when people don't do stuff, it will just create that friction that we talked about. So you have to have that tough conversation. And you can have many of these. You can have one today, you can have another one in 3 months, you can have another one in 6 months. But the fact is that you have to have that conversation about who's delivering some things at some point. Otherwise, you'll just have that disconnect. It will happen, because even if you haven't quantified it, you know when you're not being treated fairly, or when you're carrying somebody else. So in the first instance, not all the share allocations have to be the same. Second is that you have to find some way of quantifying it at some stage, otherwise you just have dispute. And you can iterate that tangible assessment over time. But then the third point here is that each one of those conditions, let's say we talked about X, it can be broken down into sub-elements. X can equal X1 plus X2 plus X3. You don't have to have one tangible measurable thing. So you can have a whole set of deliveries, milestones, etc., that you can construct into your tangible, measurable output. But at some stage, if you're going to adjust the equity, there has to be a clear understanding and an agreement of how that's going to be. And the platform will allow you to set those conditions. There's a book that you might want to reach out and read called Slicing Pie. And Mike Moyer, who wrote that book, a great fan of Vesteds, but he also has helped people set out what those tangible, measurable conditions are. So that might be something for you to consider. But as I said, it doesn't have to be set firm now forever. It can be for a given time horizon. It does have to be measurable and tangible, and it can be a whole host of sub-conditions that result in the total ultimate condition. Hope that helps, Lucy.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, especially for young founders. A lot of young founders start out without a clear understanding of what goals they will have or what milestones they need to reach. And then a few months later, it leads to huge disagreements. And that's how a lot of startups basically dissolved, especially in the younger generation. So,
as we said, 65% of startups fail because of conflict between the co-founders. And that's usually because people aren't pulling their weight. And then of those, it's really painful because it could be a brilliant idea that the world's going to miss out on because you guys weren't able to get your stuff together.
Yeah, that's why Vested would be one of the first products you guys should be starting out. So the next question comes from Paulina. She asks, are there any useful benchmarks for the amount of options, equity, that should be allocated for new hires when just starting out? For example, for first 10 hires.
Okay, there is a general rule. So firstly, again, I'll just reference out to Mike Moyer and Slicing Pie when you're setting up a business, and you can do the whole process of Slicing Pie on the Vested platform. Okay, just for the avoidance of doubt. But the distribution between co-founders, especially that very first distribution, is really around what each is going to bring to the table. And obviously that first distribution is 100% of the business. But then obviously as time goes on, you will have investors. And as each investor comes along, it will mean that your proportion of the business dilutes. When you get to a level where you're getting serious investors, certainly serious angels, VCs, definitely venture capitalists, they will all assume or ask you to make provision for 10 to 15% of your equity for your team. Now, you may not have that team in place yet, but at the time of taking that investment, they will expect you to have already accommodated the notion of having the 10 to 15% for your team. Because when people invest in a business, they realize the founder may well be brilliant, the founders may be brilliant, but without a team, there's not much delivery. So they need to make sure that everybody is vested in the success of the enterprise. And so that allocation of 10 to 15% is always the case, depending on which angel or VC you end up partnering with.
Cool. And the next,
Paulina.
Yeah. We see the next question from Ayush. What kinds of deliverables should be set for CEO and CTO co-founders for conditional shares?
Again, it's very business specific, but the CEO, big chunk of that is around the setup of the business, the bringing together of the team, setting the vision, and certainly along with the CFO, although CFOs and all these C words come in due course, to be honest. Early stage, it's about creating the vision, making it manifest, and helping to get a team around it, however small or large that team is, and then getting people to invest. And that investment, as I said earlier, sometimes it is around cash, but it's not always cash. Investment comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and that's around the co-founders and early contributors to the business, even if you don't have employees per se, because each business has a whole host of teams, and the CEO's responsibility is clearly pulling that initial team together in the first instance. Ongoing, it's about keeping that team directed in terms of the outcome of the business and the vision, but also making sure that it's fed and watered. So accessing resources, be they capital, be they anything else.
And the next question comes from Vishay. How do we navigate the ticking time bomb that is SEIS?
Tell me what you mean by the ticking time bomb. There's lots of benefits of SEIS. I haven't heard it as a ticking time bomb, but if you can explain a little bit more about what you're asking for.
So let's move to the next question, and we are waiting for your explanation, Vishay. So then Nayan asks, how do we evaluate dependent performance? For example, finance and marketing directors.
So for each of those roles, finance director, you need to decide as the founder, what are you asking this person to do? If you're not clear as to what you're asking that person to do, it's very difficult for them to actually deliver that. And the founder's role, the CEO's role, is about being clear with them in terms of what their delivery is. But for a CFO or the guy in charge of the person in charge of your finance, it's around making sure that the money comes into the business and that it's deployed effectively and efficiently once it comes in. So is that the person alongside the CEO? I mean, at this stage, I'm not sure the CEO can be divorced from the fundraising and the financing in any material way. It's usually a pretty close joint venture. But the accessing of the capital is the key thing, and allowing the team to have the resources that they need to run. That's for the CFO, making sure that the distribution of that stuff is appropriate. In terms of marketing, again, what is it that you want to achieve? Are you looking for, in the first instance, just a marketing plan? The first deliverable might well be the marketing plan that gets us from A to B in a certain time horizon. It may then, in due course, break down into lots of different sub-elements, like the amount of spend for marketing leads back to your business, or qualified marketing leads, or indeed making sure that you rank on Google for whatever it is that you're selling, and rank at a certain cost base. So there's lots of things that you can break down into what the person should deliver. But again, things like Slicing Pie are really good at helping people break down those deliverables.
Cool. And then a different kind of question from Philip, more about your journey, Ifty. Yeah. How did you come up with the idea for Vested?
Okay, so I came up with the idea of Vested on a very circuitous route. So my old life, quarter of a century in energy, oil and gas. I used to buy and sell companies. I'd always have very expensive lawyers and bankers helping me structure whatever I wanted to do, whether it was a transaction or indeed setting up leadership team reward structures. The other piece of the jigsaw was when I was at Stanford. And one of the things that I learned about there was this whole notion of the ownership effect. The notion that if you have a stake in an enterprise, your relationship with it changes emotionally, psychologically, what you bring to the table changes. But notice that although it was quite easy to do and everybody was doing it in Silicon Valley, it was something that a very small proportion of businesses were actually doing in the UK. Of the, 1.2 million SMEs that there are in the UK, there are only 12,000 to 15,000 EMIs running at any point in time. That's a tiny, tiny number. It's crazy. When people don't appreciate how powerful equity can be, both in terms of getting people on board and in terms of getting them to deliver, it's crazy. So I wanted to make this happen. I actually, when I finished in the energy business, it was more a case of when mum and dad passed away, I just thought I wanted to change my life, and I wanted to do something different, bring some capability. I had a chunk of cash that I was essentially going to be investing into early stage businesses, right? 150 grand here and there. But I thought alongside that, because I'd wanted to be an entrepreneur 25 years prior, but had not been given the support that I needed from the whole enterprise council with my little idea. And I thought, forget it, I'll go away for a couple of years. I've got this offer from BP. I'll make my own money and I'll do it myself. 2 years turned into 25. But at that stage, I also realized that although I've got this pot of money, I don't have a real life experience of the challenges that early stage businesses are going through today. So I actually set up Vested as a test bed for myself, both to learn the challenges and hurdles that founders were going through in building businesses, and so that when we were deploying cash, it was going in with some knowledge and experience. After a couple of years, I had put $250,000 to one side, and I thought 2 years on, I'll be a millionaire again. Didn't quite happen that way. I ended up putting probably 10 times as much into the business, and certainly a lot more years than that. But what I decided was, actually, if we can get Vested working well, I can help a damn sight more of those little Ifties that couldn't get funding all those years ago. If I can help them set up and manage their equity well, we can help lots of brilliant ideas get past go safely and effectively with the right people on board at the right point in time, managing everything to do with your equity, not just your share schemes, but how you distribute equity between the founding partners, how you issue equity to your first investors, how you then take that on to options and everything else without it costing you a fortune. Most of these things cost in the thousands of pounds every time you go and meet a lawyer or an accountant to get help on this. As you'll see with launch on Vested, you will see that it's peanuts, because we're actually wanting to make a difference.
I think it's an amazing story behind Vested. I didn't know about that. We have time for 2 or 3 more questions. We see another one from Paulina. How does equity allocation differ in the US and Europe in startups?
I guess every single business will be different. In the US, things like slicing pie have been around for a while before you even set up the business. But the challenge with distributing notional equity versus real equity is a big difference. You see, once you're a shareholder, once you set up a business, right, there's loads of protection that you have under Companies Act, and the directors have to work in the interest of the business. So if you've been given some shares, somebody can't just arbitrarily, or some options or some conditional shares, somebody can't just arbitrarily just pull them back or make them disappear. Whereas if it's before you've set up the formal business and there's a notion of distributing share tokens or points, it's quite easy for that spreadsheet to not truly reflect what was agreed when you got kicked off. And your protections around adjusting that, if that's the case, it is quite difficult to do. So the best option is to make sure that you set up the enterprise. The enterprise itself, as I said, under Companies Act, gives you lots of protections. The founders, the directors have fiduciary duties towards you under UK law. And that's why it's really important to set up the business as soon as you can, so that all of these things are set and able for you to utilize going forward. Europe, equity, just as in the US and the UK, is used quite well between founders, but there's a lot more structure and cost and complexity in deploying it. There are lots of people who will start up a business here in the UK and then use something like the Agile Partnership to get it to a certain level and then port it to their home location once all that's done. Because doing the sort of stuff that we do through the Agile Partnership is very, very difficult for you to do elsewhere. You can do it, but it's a lot more expensive and a lot more complex.
Cool. And then Vishai clarified and expanded on his previous question. How do we navigate the ticking time on that is SEIS, the 2-year time limit on using SEIS? If a startup is still in the idea stage, how do we think about the 2-year time frame?
Okay, so I think most businesses, most ideas, taking SEIS, you won't find it too difficult. If it's a good idea, you start running and you utilize that resource that comes under SEIS, because it is high risk capital that anybody giving you SEIS is doing, but they have a huge amount of protection around that as well. So they're only putting 18, 20 pence on the table for each pound that they put in, but they get a huge reward. So when you're taking on the 100, 160 grand to get the business past go, that first couple of years, I can't imagine it would be too difficult to deploy that capital well, if the idea has legs. And I guess for me, I wouldn't personally take that capital unless I was clear about how I was going to spend it, or at least how I was going to spend a chunk of it from day one. So people should only take third-party cash when they know what they want to do with that cash. And at that stage, then over a 2-year horizon, that amount of money, I would imagine, won't be too difficult to deploy, especially if you're building a team around it, you're building some assets around it. Money goes quite quickly, as I mentioned earlier. Before you know it, the $250,000 that I put aside had disappeared.
Cool. And we have the last question from Nader. I guess we have quite a lot of Web3 people at Seedery. So Nader is asking about DAOs. What are your thoughts, Ifty? Are DAOs the future of companies?
I think they're a very important part of the future. I think one of the things, and I think Web3 has a big future in terms of equity and deployment of equity around the business. But there's a number of things that are just not easily translated. Firstly, in terms of all the protections that you get under having real equity versus some notional equity in the terms of a DAO or a token. But then the cost of transferring tokens, for instance, or even ETH, it becomes really expensive when you don't need it to be that expensive. You think about gas fees for one small transaction. If you're doing that each time, it starts getting really complex. So I think there is a future for DAOs, for tokens, and other ways of deploying equity, but it'll be more as a mirror of what the truth is. The truth is the real shareholding of the business, and you want that to be held within a jurisdiction that is safe, has the protection of law around you, and that's one thing that Companies Act is phenomenal around. And then also the investment protections and opportunities. Firstly, responsibilities under Companies Act of the directors to work in the interest of the shareholders. And then secondly, things like fundraising. If you're a theoretical company or not geographically located or not held as a limited enterprise, let's say in the UK, for instance, things like SEIS that we were just talking about, or EIS, they're just not available to you.
Cool. So I guess we'll finish with that question. Thank you so much, Ifty, for telling us more. We've learned a lot on equity and how to incorporate company. And thank you for being our partner with Seedery and dropping this amazing deal. So guys in the audience, whether you want to incorporate a company or already have a company and want to learn how to manage your equity, check out the link on the screen and hurry up and get a great deal that Vested prepared for us. Thank you, Ifty.
Okay, and don't forget the code for the 50% discount, which is Cedary50.
Cedary50. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank you very much, guys.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.